The opening trap for Saw 5 is the pendulum, the imitation Jigsaw trap created by Mark Hoffman to execute his sister's killer. Like many Jigsaw traps, Hoffman would take inspiration from a historical torture device and add a modern element using machinery. There's some debate as to whether or not the pendulum was actually used to scare or torture prisoners of the Spanish Inquisition in the 18th century, but we can say with certainty that it was used by Edgar Allan Poe in his fictional story, The Pit and the Pendulum. In fact, almost all of the traps in Saw 5 have ties to uncivilized methods of enforcing justice, and the end of the movie would bring the connection to the Pit and the Pendulum back front and center. So stick around to the end of this video to find out why. Welcome back to Things You Missed, and welcome back to my Saw series. If you want to see all 171 things you missed in Saws 1 through 4, click here. Saw 5 would continue the tradition of not bringing in anyone with any experience directing a major studio movie by hiring the production designer of the last 3 movies, David Hackl. As you might expect, this resulted in a lot of Easter eggs hidden in the actual set, maybe more than ever before. So let's take a look at some things you missed. After the introduction with the pendulum trap, we're finally shown the aftermath of the Gideon meatpacking plant games of Saws 3 and 4. Agent Strahm ends up locked in the operation room and is only able to find his way out with the aid of some glow-in-the-dark paint pointing out a secret door. This is kind of a combination of the glow-in-the-dark paint illuminating the breakable wall in Saw 1 and the cracks at the edge of the trap door revealing an exit in Saw 2. Strahm then finds himself in the water cube trap, and he has to use the only thing he has on him, his pen, to perform a tracheectomy. This was really well set up in Saw 4, where Strahm was constantly seen fidgeting with the pen. To Hoffman's surprise, he makes it out of the building alive, and on the ambulance is what I believe is the first example where we clearly see the state license plates, and the nickname of the state is the Fairweather State. Throughout this series, I've talked about how I think Saw takes place in a fictional state in the Northeast United States, and the plate does kind of look like New Jersey. Additionally, when we see the inside of the FBI headquarters, the words Eastern Surveillance are written on a window, as if to suggest that Jigsaw City is on the East Coast, and a line from Britt Stevenson later on could be alluding to the fact that she works nearby in New York City.
No, I'm not. I build condos in one of the most densely populated cities in the country.
The FBI has offices in both Newark and New York, and Agent Strahm's phone number has a 212 area code, meaning he could be from the nearby city of New York. As Jill Tuck waits to meet with her ex-husband's executor, a woman in the waiting room reads a magazine about John Kramer, with articles written by Elise Lam and Nate Richmond, both of which are Easter eggs for crew members on Saw 5. Nate Richmond was a production assistant and Elise Lam was the art director. As far as characters who never appear on screen, Elise's is one of the biggest, because she not only wrote this magazine article, but also the newspaper article announcing Jigsaw's death, the article about the death of Hoffman's sister, another article about Angelina's murder, and one about the death of her killer, Seth Baxter. But there are a couple unseen Easter egg characters that are even more interesting than Elise. You may remember Sean Schofield, the graphic designer who put his name on the fingerprint analysis report in Saw 4. For Saw 5, he was promoted to first assistant art director, so he got to put his name in there even more. He seems to have helped prepare these probable victim binders, along with Stephanie Wolishin. In the real world, Stephanie is a production assistant, but in the Saw world, she's an FBI agent living a double life as an investigative journalist for the Herald, the same newspaper that Charles Salomon also writes for.
I'm an investigative journalist for the Herald.
I can't imagine the FBI is too happy about one of their agents publishing information about the same cases that they're investigating for a public newspaper, but for our purposes, Stephanie's information answers a big question about the link between John Kramer and Hoffman. How did John find out about Hoffman before the pendulum if the pendulum was Hoffman's first attempt at a trap? It seems that before killing Angelina, Seth Baxter was involved in a drug charge, so he probably had ties to Jill's drug clinic like many of Jigsaw's victims did. So John would have been watching Seth around the time that he took out Hoffman's sister, and when Seth went to prison for it, John switched his focus to Hoffman. The lore you can discover in the newspapers in this series is just so interesting to me for some reason. I guess I feel like I'm getting extra content somehow. For example, Sean Schofield may have also had a second job outside of the FBI, though it's kind of hard to tell on this one. It might say Sean Medfield. We'll have to revisit this if they ever release the movies in 4K, or we could just not do that because no one cares. I like how there's a level of consistency when building the Saw world. When Strahm is clicking through the headlines, the publications are many of the same ones we've seen in previous movies. It's also amazing how so many of these Jigsaw articles all use the same picture, which is really just a screenshot from Saw 1. Heck, I even used it in my Things You Missed thumbnail. It's a good picture. Billy should make it his Twitter avatar. He'd fit right in on that website, considering he's a puppet. When Jill watches the tape left behind for her by John, you can tell it was made in the operating room from Saw 3, while John still has his hair, but does not have the bruises given to him by Matthews anymore, which means he probably recorded this shortly before the Gideon Meatpacking Plant games of 2006. This is important because it shows us how late in his life John began to have remorse about the way his marriage ended. With the discovery of John's body, a ceremony is held at the police station to honor the fallen officers in his case and promote Hoffman to deputy lieutenant.
But today I'd like to offer a special honor to the detective who's been on this case right from the beginning.
Wait, hold on. If you're honoring Hoffman for being there from the beginning, what about Fisk? According to the FBI's records, Fisk has actually been on the task force longer than Hoffman. I mean, I know Hoffman probably gets some credit for saving that girl, but as far as we know, Fisk has a much cleaner record than Hoffman. He doesn't even get honored at all. He just has to sit there. Hashtag justice for Fisk. Also, we get our first look at Pamela Jenkins, who would play a bigger role, but not until the next movie. Foreshadowing. When Hoffman gives his speech, he talks about cherishing life and bringing justice, which could be what you want to hear from your new lieutenant, but also happens to be Jigsaw's motto, and Hoffman would be the one to carry out Jigsaw's work. Justice would be the key theme in the main game of Saw 5, and each trap was carefully chosen to be symbolic of this idea.
We both deserve to be here.
Strahm, or as those close to him call him, Peter, is ordered off the Jigsaw case by his superior, J. Jonah Jameson.
Hoffman!
And Hoffman begins leaving breadcrumbs to make Agent Erickson, put the pieces together that maybe Peter is Spider-Man. Jigsaw. Hoffman goes back to his new lair to check on the next game, and we see how much he's learned from Jigsaw based on the way he decorates the place. The anatomical human drawings call back to the diagrams of the operation room. One of them is a copy of the vascular system diagram from the spike trap in Saw 4. The miniature version of the game was also used by John to plot out the details of the bathroom game. This game would be known as the Fatal Fives trial, and because it was being held this time by Hoffman, a police officer who was obsessed with justice after feeling his sister's killer was not properly punished, each trap resembles an old, outdated criminal execution method. And yes, to be entirely clear, this game was mapped out by John, but Hoffman was still the one to put everything into motion. So I think the symbolism is still valid. The first room is an update on a device tracing back to France during the times of the French Revolution. The guillotine was used to behead its victims, but this version implemented a system of tension wires to force the participants to all work together in order for them to survive. Instead of the typical shape for a guillotine, these blades all have a V shape, which may be on purpose to stay on theme with the Roman numeral representing the fifth movie. There are also 5 participants in this game, and I don't think that's an accident. The second room requires victims to find keys that give them access to these safety chambers. The name of the game is Inclusion. There aren't enough chambers to protect everybody, so in order for everyone to survive, someone would have had to invite another into their chamber. The Salem witch trials were a series of hearings that outcast supposed witches from society in the 1600s. And like the unlucky loser who was outcast in this room, they would meet a fiery fate. I guess this is Saw 5's Pig Vat in the sense that it's pretty metal.
Yeah, it is actually. Man on.
The third room contained the electric bathtub, which represented another American execution method, the electric chair, which was created in the 1880s in Buffalo, New York, not too far away from where I think Saw takes place. Again, this one was designed for each of the 5 of them to work together by dividing up the voltage, rather than having one person take on the full shock. The last room represents human sacrifice, which I don't think we can trace back to one specific era or culture, but again is designed for them to work together by each sacrificing a smaller amount of blood. Of course, that doesn't happen because there are only 2 of them left at this point, so here's what I would have done. They had to fill this beaker up with blood to a certain point in order to win the game. There is a grate blocking the way, so you can't just drop stuff directly in the beaker. It has to be liquid. The door to the bathtub room was still open after they cleared it, so I would take off my shirt, dip it in the tub until it's soaking wet, and then ball it up and squeeze out the water above the beaker. They probably could have filled it up most of the way like that. It's not until the end that they realize what Jigsaw was trying to tell them from the beginning, that they need to work together.
Today, this singular way of thinking will be put to the test. Today, 5 will become 1 with a common goal of survival.
But while Hoffman executes the Fatal Fives game, Strahm follows the trail of Hoffman. In one scene at the FBI headquarters, we actually see somebody studying audio waveforms, something that would come back in the next movie. There's also a name randomly written on an FBI bulletin board, Tom Van Selides. He's the assistant production manager on Saw 5. The police station also has another crew reference Easter egg. A box in the background here contains the name Soren Popescu, who is the first assistant art director. As Strahm gets closer and closer to discovering the truth about Hoffman, Hoffman. We learn more and more about Hoffman's past and how he came to be involved with the Jigsaw. It starts after he conducted the pendulum trap one day at its apartment complex, when he bumps into this stereotypical girl who probably watches my videos and follows his journey through the building. He hears what he thinks is a dispute and approaches with his gun out. It turns out to be only this lady with her dog, but I think this scene does a good job of illustrating what kind of cop Hoffman is. This trait would be explored again in Saw 7. Yeah, I prefer to call it Saw 7, because it's very difficult to watch it in 3D anymore, and also it's not the final chapter anymore, so I don't call it that either. Finally, he gets to the elevator, where he's got to get out of the way of this lady and these dudes who are probably on their way to go meet up with Found Flicks at the Papa Roach concert, so it ends up just being Hoffman and John in the elevator. And since this scene takes place shortly before the events of Saw 1, John is seen wearing the leather gloves that were a big part of the first movie, but weren't really used in the Bousman films. Some say these gloves are an homage to Italian horror director Dario Argento, who has a movie called Deep Red, where the bad guy has these leather gloves. I mean, I guess it could be an intentional reference, but it could just as easily be not that.
Hoffman! Yeah.
He wakes up in John's workshop in this spectacularly uncreative trap, but one thing I did notice was an early version of the death collar from Saw 3. In that movie, Amanda claims that she built the collar, so maybe she physically built it off of one of John's prototype designs. When John details the rules of the game to Hoffman, he does so through the reflection of a mirror.
I am the man you call Jigsaw.
Could he be doing this because he's looking into the past, looking back at the rear view of the old Hoffman who has not yet been reborn as a disciple of Jigsaw? Is that too deep for a Saw movie? Maybe. Maybe not. Also in this workshop, I spotted one of those Chinese figurines from beside John's deathbed in Saw 3 and the New Year's Festival in Saw 4. Strahm would continue to go through old files to dig out more and more about Mark Hoffman's past, where he would page past a curious detail that could have changed the context of crimes that took place all the way back in the first Saw film. As Strahm goes through the old case files from the razor wire traps victim Paul Leahy, you may notice that Detective Hoffman was actually the lead investigator on it. When we see that crime scene back in the first movie, it's Singh, Tapp, and Carey, who has not yet been promoted to detective. There's no sign of Hoffman at all. I don't know if that means he had already investigated it and these other guys were coming to take a second look, or if he was calling the shots and asked Singh and Tapp to make their own assessment, perhaps to lead them down the path to Jigsaw with a plan to take them out. The files seen earlier on list Hoffman, Tapp, and Singh as investigators on the case, and it seems to be the first Jigsaw case any of them worked on from what we can see there. Though I should add that there are other Jigsaw murders that aren't listed here or shown in any movie, but I'm not going to talk about that in this video. We'll probably never solve the mystery of Hoffman's involvement in the Paul Leahy case. Saw 5 also has another ambiguous question, which comes up when Jill Tuck meets with Erickson at the FBI headquarters, claiming that she believes the Bureau is following her.
I think it's the agent who interrogated me.
Agent Strahm.
The strange thing is, we never see this happen. In fact, we see Strahm laser focused on investigating Hoffman, paying no attention to Jill. I guess it is possible that she was told to do this by John as part of his instructions for her after his death, but I've come to think that there is another possibility. In Saw 6, we see that she has made contact with Hoffman, who is actively trying to get rid of Strahm and make him look like the unknown accomplice. I think there's a possibility that Hoffman instructed Jill to bring up these concerns with Erickson. Maybe he even threatened her to get what he wants. I don't see any other reason for her to go to him, unless she's just trying to get a job at the Daily Bugle.
You serious?
Maybe it was all part of Hoffman's plan to frame Special Agent Strahm. He does so by leaving Strahm's phone in his lair at the catacombs where the Fiendish Five's game took place. Okay, not the Fiendish Five, the Fatal Five. That's what they're called.
You know, that Thingus Rackamagookus had a lot of nice pictures, but way too many big words.
So he led J. Jonah Jameson to believe that Strahm was guilty, while leading Strahm to a seemingly inconspicuous house. A house that is the last house on the left side of its street, with a light on the left and a storage area on the right. A house with a small door underneath the stairs. A house whose walls have a very familiar layout. Could this location be the infamous nerve gas house, which was the venue of the main game seen in Saw 2? It's definitely very similar in layout, right down to the room that contained the safe with a trap door in the same spot leading down to the underground tunnel network, which appears to be the very same tunnel network that contains the bathroom, judging by the inclusion of this sliding door. We know that John was a civil engineer, once involved in a major housing project, and he does have access to multiple properties. In Saw 2, we see him utilize both the nerve gas house and the fake out house with a seemingly similar layout. We also know that the project was supposed to provide housing to 40 low-income families, so it seems reasonable that each of these units was based on the same design, and they may have each had the same layout. I have to admit, it doesn't really make sense for John or Hoffman to pull off a major renovation of the dilapidated nerve gas house just for this one small moment. I mean, I'm not really even sure that they could fix up the house in such a short time frame, especially given all that they accomplished between October 2005 and April 2006, and Saw 5 takes place not too long after, most likely in July 2006. Maybe these houses were all placed on a grid so that there were several houses on the left side of their respective streets. That would put the Hoffman house in the same neighborhood as the nerve gas house and the fake-out house, which would make it plausible that it could be connected to the same tunnel network that contains both the bathroom and the glass coffin room. And we know that it's the same tunnel network because Strahm finds a big red streak, which we learn the origin of in Saw 7 when we see the quote-unquote extended version of Gordon's escape from the bathroom after Saw 1. Like I mentioned earlier, this might just be one of those Saw mysteries that can never be fully explained, forever being discussed in the comments. Although I think there is more of a chance that this location could be revisited in a future movie, so maybe one day we'll find out. The safe room is also full of Easter eggs, and I'm not even talking about that clown that is basically identical to the one clown in Beverly's house in the 2017 version of It. The room contains more of those Chinese figures, the pig ornament from Jeff Denlin's study, and several wood mannequins, a connection to the many mannequins that John used to test his traps on, dating back to the old Stygian Street hideout in an old mannequin factory. So Hoffman's plan, at least for now, works. J. Jonah Erickson finds Strahm's phone in the catacombs at the site of the game, and Strahm falls victim to the collapsing walls of the glass coffin trap. At the beginning of this video, I mentioned the pendulum, which was also the titular device of Edgar Allan Poe's short story, The Pit in the Pendulum. To bring that connection full circle, Saw 5's final trap represents the pit, as written by Poe himself. Its center, and of course its greatest width, came just over the yawning gulf. I shrank back, but the closing walls pressed me resistlessly onward. At length, for my seared and writhing body, there was no longer an inch of foothold on the firm floor of the prison. I struggled no more, but the agony of my soul found vent in one loud, long, and final scream of despair. While this would be the end of Strahm, his legacy would live on in the sequel. So join me in the next episode for even more things you missed in Saw 6. Remember to subscribe to CZsWorld for new horrors every week, ring the death bell for notifications, and I'll see you in the next one, assuming we both survive.